In this video, we are going to talk about chapter 4 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And if you have not already watched the introduction to Frankenstein, and then also if you have not also watched the video on chapter 3, I will link both of those videos up top for you. So we mentioned that in chapter 3, we are seeing Victor off at university and in Ingolstadt, about a 400-mile travel from Geneva, Switzerland, where he grew up and where he went to school, to Ingolstadt, Germany. And in chapter 3, he meets two professors, one of them Professor Kremp, one Professor Waldman. Kremp is very kind of snarky toward him, doesn't really like that he was reading some of these more pseudoscientific philosophers, you might say. And then his other professor, Professor Waldman, actually really admires the fact that he has these grand ambitions for studying the sciences, and actually mentions to him that if he studies chemistry, he'll see in the modern chemists that a lot of the modern chemists have these same grand ambitions. So he gets really wrapped up in chemistry. And what we really see in chapter 4, if we had to sum up all of chapter 4 we see Victor really tinkering in his laboratory, working on creating life from dead matter. I think in this chapter we're going to see that Victor, I think we're going to see the parallels between Victor creating life and Adam creating the first life in the Garden of Eden. I think we're going to start to see those parallels here, and these parallels are going to become much more obvious as the novel goes on. But I think we really start to see them here. And so let's begin. So in chapter 4, like I said, Victor's tinkering. We're told in chapter 4 that he spends really 2 years working on this project of creating life from dead matter. And I mentioned in the last video that his motivations for why he's doing this, I want us to try to get to the bottom of why he's doing this. I had thoughts and ideas that it might have something to do with him losing his mother very quickly and then not having appropriate time to grieve her, but we'll see some of his motivations come out a little bit in this chapter. So we mentioned that 2 years pass in his work in his laboratory, and he mentions one particular area that is really of interest to him in his chemistry studies, and that is the human body, the human frame, and whether, to what extent, this is, remember, the 1800s, to what extent this would today be biology versus being chemistry back then, not totally sure. But this would have, at the time, I guess what Mary Shelley's saying here is this would have, these kinds of experiments would have more likely fallen under the chemistry. And Victor says the following, and remember, he's still narrating this part to our Robert Walton explorer. And he says, one of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endowed with life, whence, from where, another way, what that means, from where, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which had ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? So he's very interested in this question of where does life come from, and that's a question we still think about today. I mean, it's sometimes, it has all these different names now in philosophy, but this idea of it's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is, how do we take kind of brain matter, which is just sort of stuff, and how does that bring about consciousness? Right? How does consciousness, thought, and innovation and creativity come from this, dead matter or just stuff? And so Victor is very much thinking about this same question in the 1800s. Is from where does life come from? Where is this principle of life coming from? We learn a little bit more about Victor in this chapter. Some more bits of characterization. We're told, I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or to have feared the apparition of a spirit, like a ghost. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a graveyard, was to me merely the place, the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. So, walking through a graveyard didn't scare him. It's just no ghosts there. It was just a place where bodies decayed and became food for worms, essentially. So he doesn't seem to be a particularly superstitious person. He also doesn't seem to be particularly spiritual in any way. He seems, if we might use the term, the modern term now, materialist. Someone who just kind of, life is just stuff, right? There is no immaterial aspect to nature. It's all just matter. He kind of strikes me that way, at least in these passages. Okay, let's pick up. He says, so he says, I'm not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable of his discovering life. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. So I'm going to just pause there because there's a lot in there. So he just got through, and this is where we can maybe think about Victor as being possibly unreliable. He just got through telling us he's not particularly spiritual, given to thinking about spirits at all. And yet, just listen to the language of how he's describing his discovery of life here. Some miracle might have produced it. Okay, miracle is kind of a religious, spiritual language there, and so possibly a possible little bit of unreliability there. Also, I love the way, I think there's a ton revealed here, a lot of characterization here, just about how he corrects himself here. Listen to it again. I think it's really, really great. He says, after days and nights of incredible labor, remember, he was at work on this for 2 years. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. So I discovered the origins of life. Then he says, nay, more. No, let me correct myself. Let me rephrase that. So I didn't discover the cause of generation and life. I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. So he goes from saying I discovered this to no. It's all about me. I became capable of doing this. So it's a subtle difference, but I think that reveals a lot here, that his motivations are kind of about him, right? It's not, hey, I discovered this. I discovered the secret, God's secrets, or that I'm playing God here, or that I'm discovering God's secrets of nature. It's no. It's, I became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Me, I, right? And so it's about him, right? And I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see that here in chapters 4, especially in chapter 5. Especially in chapter 5, when the monster's finally going to come alive in chapter 5. And so that little bit, I think, there reveals a lot about his character. But again, he's interested in bringing life to lifeless matter. I think this, It's not said explicitly, but is he wanting to kind of bring mom back here? Maybe, maybe, maybe. He has. Then we're going to see that there is this attachment he has to his stepsister Elizabeth, that I think Elizabeth starts to kind of serve as a, since his mom has passed away, sort of serve as this female figure. I don't want to say mother figure, but kind of for him. And so this motivation to try to bring life back, is maybe trying to bring, have mom back. I don't want to get too psychological or Freudian about it, but that could be what's going on here. So now, remember, he's narrating all of this to Robert Walton. He's telling Robert Walton all this way after the fact, after he's already created the monster and after the monster's already, spoiler alert, gone on a rampage. But so now when he's talking to you here, he's talking about Robert Walton. So you're going to hear him talking, addressing you. He's talking to Robert Walton. So listen to what he says to Robert Walton. He says, I see by your eagerness, you, Robert Walton, I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted, the secret of how to bring life to lifeless matter. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. So it's him recognizing in Walton, I see you're curious about how to create life. I'm not going to tell you because I have some serious reservations about it. I'm worried about what this knowledge could unleash, which again is another bit of foreshadowing for us, right? That this knowledge is so dangerous. The knowledge he discovered is so dangerous that he does not want to share it with Robert Walton. Okay. He goes on. He says, I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, back when I was in college, to your destruction and infallible misery. More foreshadowing. I mean, if I tell you this, it's going to lead to destruction and your own misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example. How dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge? Acquiring certain knowledge is dangerous. Okay? He seems to be at least suggesting to us, and this is something that later on in the semester when we start looking at other pieces, especially in this first thematic section about creators and what they owe society and what they owe their technology. Are there certain technologies that are so dangerous that we should just not pursue them? That we should just cut off certain avenues of knowledge? Well, I mean, here Victor is saying, my example kind of shows that acquiring certain knowledge is dangerous. Right? So he's tinkering. He decides that in trying to create the human form, that he is going to go with a much bigger version of a being. He's not going to go with a normal sized human, and he tells us this because it's easier to work with. It's easier. There are so many muscles. The musculature of a human body is so complicated. All the veins and arteries so complicated that it's easier to just work with a much bigger scale human. And so he ends up making the being, or the monster, what we're going to eventually call it, 8 feet tall. Right? So that if he makes it larger in scale, it's easier to work with. Obviously, making something this big is gonna eventually come back to haunt him. Okay, he says the following, and maybe this could be another little bit that possibly points to his maybe not so humble motives here. He says, life and death appeared to me ideal bounds which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me, No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. So again, he's thinking about kind of bringing back life. So he's saying a couple of things there that I think are important. One is, if I could figure out how to create life, then I could figure out how to renew life from something that was dead. Maybe thinking about mom there. I mean, if I can create life from lifeless matter, then maybe I could take someone who's dead, bring him back to life. Maybe that's probably the closest we get to him referring to mom is right there. But also notice his motivations are not really, he doesn't seem to have very humble motivations here. The motivations are, a new species would bless and praise me. He's thinking very much about himself, and he's also not thinking about how any of this will affect anyone around him. It's very much about getting gratification for himself, and getting praise himself, and he's not really thinking about anyone else or how his technological innovation here might impact anybody else. And so he kind of selfish. Maybe if we had to point out some characterization, maybe a little selfish here. He's only going to become, I think, more. He's only going to be thinking more about the larger consequences of his technology or of his creation here once things start to go bad. But he's not really thinking about it here very much at all. And so throughout the rest of chapter 4, he's working really tirelessly to create this. We find out he's like obsessively working on this project. He's not sleeping. He's not going outside. He's also not telling anybody else about this. He's working on this in a very unscientific way. He's not getting feedback or input from professors. He's not talking to colleagues about it. He's doing this in his own dorm, like by himself. He's not talking to anybody else about this. And so he's very much isolated and making himself sick. He tells us at the very end of the chapter, every night I was oppressed by a slow fever and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures, his fellow humans, as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away any incipient disease. And so he's isolating himself. He knows he's making himself sick, and he's obviously, it's not good. He's doing this for 2 years, and only in chapter 5 are we going to then see the monster come to life. So check out the next video for discussion of chapter 5, but that really ends chapter 4. And in chapter 5, I think we're going to see the monster is definitely going to come to life, and I think we're also going to see in chapter 5 more of these biblical parallels start to arise between Victor and the monster and God and Adam. I think that's going to start to become clear in chapter 5.